Hello, Year 9. Last lesson we looked at extracts from a poem called Crusoe in England by Elizabeth Bishop. Just to start today, let's have a quick recap. What can you remember about the poem? Who was speaking in the poem? And what had happened in the speaker's life? Take 2 minutes to just jot down anything you can remember from those extracts we read. Okay, today's poem then is a very famous poem called The Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats. Let's just think about that title again. So if we're thinking about our still structure, let's think about T, title. What ideas have you got about the poem from the title? What impression does it give us? There's no right or wrong answer here, just a feeling of what the poem might convey. Have a little think, please. 2 minutes. Okay, let's read the poem in a second or two. Before we do that, let's hear a little bit about W.B. Yeats. He was considered one of the most important poets of the 20th century. He's hugely influential and has gone on to influence many, many other poets and writers who came after him. He was born in Ireland in the middle of the 19th century in 1865, and his poetry is well known for a lyrical beauty that often engaged with Irish history, politics, and mythology. He was quite keen on including symbols in his writing, using them to represent and explore the ideas behind his work. And it's certainly something that you've been thinking about while you've been working from home, is this idea of symbols. What can they tell us about characters? What can they represent? And how can we use them to tell parts of our story? Well, Yeats did that quite a lot. Okay, let's look at the poem now then. The Lake Isle of Innisfree. You're going to go through the same process as you did with Island Man by Grace Nichols. You're going to read the poem. It's very short, as you can see. There's only 12 lines there, 3 stanzas. You're going to read the poem to yourself, and then I'd like you to read the poem out loud, or maybe you could read it to somebody at home or get them to read it to you. You'll also quite easily be able to find versions of this online as well if you prefer to listen to somebody else read it. And then I'd like you to record your initial thoughts using that same structure that we used for Island Man. So read the poem, read it aloud, and then choose one of the sentence starters at the bottom. I like this poem because the poem confuses me because the poem makes me feel something because, and just complete that sentence, please. It'll probably take about 5 or 6 minutes to do that. So this poem is quite obviously about an island in the middle of a lake. There's a picture of the very island it is supposedly written about. The Isle of Innisfree is an uninhabited island within Lochgill in County Sligo in Ireland. And this is very close to where Yeats spent many of his summers as a child. So that's an interesting little detail there, isn't it? Because Yeats is obviously associating this island with happy childhood nostalgic memories. And you can see why. It's a beautiful place to go, isn't it? Imagine exploring there, swimming over to it, or getting a boat and going over to that island and just playing there all day in the sunshine. What an amazing, adventurous time that would be. So take 10 minutes, please, and we're going to explore some of these questions here. How is this different from the other poems you've read about islands? What does the speaker want to do on this island? And of course, as we already said, Yeats likes symbols. What could the isle be a symbol of? Take 10 minutes to answer those questions, please. And of course, you can pause the film at any point. Okay, so we've now looked at the island in quite a bit of detail, and you've thought about those 3 key questions to help us explore what the island might represent in this poem. So let's just do a quick summary of what's happening. It's sometimes quite useful when we approach a poem to be able to just say quite clearly and quite simply what's happening at each stage. I'd like you to read each stanza carefully and summarise what is happening or how the poet is feeling just in 1 or 2 sentences. You can write them on the box in your booklet if you like, or on a piece of paper, however you're doing this, but just try to summarise what's happening in each of those stanzas in your own words, please. Take 5 minutes to do that. Okay, what did you get? This is some of our ideas that I came up with. You may have more detail, you may have different ways of expressing this, but essentially this is what's happened. In the first stanza, he seems to be saying that he is intending to go to an isle in a lake, build a house, and live alongside nature. I will arise, he says. A very clear, very definite description of what he's intending to do. A lot of intention in that first stanza there. In the second stanza, he says, I will have some peace and quiet there, because the place is full of peace and the nature there is beautiful. That's my summary of it. Look how he phrases his expressions there. I will, I shall. He uses this quite sort of definite way of explaining what he thinks is going to happen. And finally, in the last stanza, he says, he kind of repeats himself, doesn't he? He says, as I've said, I will go there because I can always hear the water when I'm in the grey city. I can hear it in my heart. That's what he seems to be saying. This place, this location, is very much linked into his soul, into all his emotions, into his way of feeling. And of course, it's somewhere he'd rather go or be in rather than be in the city which he evidently is in. It's interesting again how he repeats that phrase, I will arise and go now, almost as if he's trying to persuade himself that he'll go. And therefore, it kind of brings in a little bit of uncertainty, doesn't it? Even though it sounds really definite, I will do this, I will do this. If somebody keeps repeating that they're going to do something, but yet don't, it sort of brings in an element of maybe wistfulness, of uncertainty, of perhaps the fact that these dreams might not come true. And so maybe there's a bit of melancholy in this poem because of the way that he repeats that. And he finishes with that lovely line, I hear it in the deep heart's core. So even if he's not there, he will always sort of have it as a part of him. It's a very beautiful poem. So the Lake Isle of Innisfree picks up on some of the themes that we explored in our Town and Country module a few months ago, doesn't it? And I'd just like you to think back about some of the ideas we talked about in Town and Country, because these are themes which occur quite a lot in English literature. Answer these questions, please. How is Yeats presenting the country and nature in this poem? Try and find a quote to back up your point. And secondly, how is Yeats presenting the town and civilization in this poem? Find a quote to back up your point again. What other things that you've read, what other poems or extracts that we read in class does this remind you of? Does this fit into any of that kind of stereotypical thinking, those binary opposites we talked about with regard to town and country literature? Spend 10 minutes thinking and writing some ideas down, please. Okay, to finish with then, we're going to think about a comparison. This poem is about lots of things. It's about hope, it's about dreams, it's about childhood, it's about adulthood, it's about country, nature, all sorts of things. But as you can see from those words I've just listed, it's very much about comparisons. It's about one thing against another. Yeats compares the city and the country. He compares the life he currently has with the one he'd really like to lead on Innisfree. He compares his adult life with his childhood life. So if that's an important theme of the poem, comparisons, let's take that a little step further, because it's always really important for us to develop our skills in comparing poems, as this will be a really important aspect of our preparation for GCSE. Thinking about how the poems we've looked at this week, or thinking about the poems we've looked at this week, answer the question below using a P paragraph structure, please. So compare the way two poets, and it's up to you which, present islands in different ways in their poetry. Thinking about the three poems we've looked at this week. That's Island Man by Grace Nichols, Crusoe in England by Elizabeth Bishop, and The Lake Isle of Innisfree today by W.B. Yeats. You might want to look back on some of the other videos that we've put together for you on these. You might want to read those poems again from your booklets. But I'd like you to compare the way that two poets present islands in different ways in their poetry. So with your point, you'll make an observation that answers the question. For your evidence, you'll find a quote from the poems that prove your point. And finally, for your analysis, you'll explore the way the poet uses language in their description of the island, identifying any techniques and considering their effects on the reader. You might want to take about 12 to 15 minutes to do that. Okay, Year 9, I very much hope you've enjoyed looking at these three very different representations of islands in poetry, and I hope you've enjoyed thinking about some of these themes. Thank you very much for your hard work.